A man walked out of the Australian desert with a story. He came back into the world of towns and people from one of the most arid, empty, and merciless places on the entire planet. The vast red heart of the Australian Outback, a landscape that has killed countless people who wandered into it unprepared. And he told anyone who would listen that out there, in the middle of that nothing, he had found a fortune. To understand this story at all, you have to understand that place. The interior of Australia is one of the great emptinesses of the world. A landscape of red sand and spinifex and bare rock stretching to the horizon in every direction, baked by a sun that can push temperatures to lethal extremes, where water is almost non-existent and the distances are so enormous that a person can walk for days and see no living soul, no landmark, no sign that any human being has ever passed that way. It is beautiful, and it is deadly. It does not forgive mistakes. People who go into it without enough water, without knowing the land, without respect, do not always come out. And the ones who do come out changed, having seen how thin the line is between life and death in a place that vast and that indifferent. This is the stage on which Harold Lasseter's entire story plays out. Remember it. Every part of what follows is shaped by the terrible scale and the terrible emptiness of that desert. And it was from that place that Lasseter emerged, saying he had found not a nugget, not a promising claim, but a reef of solid gold, running for many kilometers across the desert. An almost unimaginable treasure, lying exposed in one of the last truly unmapped places on Earth, waiting for someone brave enough and determined enough to go back and claim it. The man's name was Harold Lasseter, and the gold he described became known as Lasseter's Reef, one of the most famous lost treasures in the history of Australia and one of its most enduring mysteries. Because the question that has hung over Lasseter's story from that day to this is brutally simple, and it has never been answered. Was any of it real? Did Lasseter truly stumble across a colossal seam of gold in the trackless desert? Or was the reef a mirage, a story that grew in the mind of one man until it consumed him and eventually cost him his life? Tonight we are going to follow Harold Lasseter into the desert. We are going to look at the tale he told, at the doomed expedition he led to prove it, at the lonely death he met out there in the sand, and at the diary found beside his body. A diary that claimed he had found the gold a second time, right before the end. And we are going to sit with the mystery that generations of prospectors, adventurers, and dreamers have thrown themselves against ever since. A lost reef of gold that hundreds of expeditions, right up to the modern age of satellites, have searched for and never, ever found. Let us start with the story Lasseter told, because everything begins and ends with his word. According to Lasseter, years before he became famous, the exact timing is itself part of the confusion, and the dates he gave shifted and blurred in the retellings. He had been crossing the central Australian desert, and there, alone in that immensity, he had come upon it. A vast reef of gold, exposed at the surface, stretching for many kilometers across the empty land. He described a treasure of staggering scale, gold in a quantity that could make a man wealthy beyond reckoning. And then, having found it, he had to survive to tell of it, and the desert nearly saw to it that he never did. By his account, he became lost. His situation grew desperate, and he was fortunate to escape the desert alive at all, carrying with him the memory of the reef and, crucially, some sense of where it lay. Now, right away, we have to be honest about the difficulties in this story, because they matter. Lasseter's account was, from the beginning, hard to verify and full of inconsistencies. The dates he gave did not always line up. The details shifted. Serious doubts have always existed about whether the young Lasseter really made the desert crossing he described at all, in the way and at the time he claimed. A reef of solid gold many kilometers long is, to put it plainly, a geological extraordinary claim. The kind of thing that, if it existed, would be one of the richest gold deposits ever found anywhere on the planet. Skeptics have pointed out all of this from the start, and yet the story had a power to it, a specificity, a conviction that made people want to believe. And in a particular moment in history, that want became overwhelming. Because the moment Lasseter found his backing was the Great Depression. By 1930, the world was in the grip of economic catastrophe. People were desperate, out of work, out of money, out of hope. And into that desperation came a man telling of a mountain of gold lying free for the taking in the Australian desert. It is not hard to understand why people listened. In times like those, the promise of a lost fortune is almost irresistible, because it offers exactly what everyone has lost: a way out, a second chance, wealth beyond imagining for anyone bold enough to go and get it. Lasseter secured financial backing, and an expedition was organized, a serious, well-funded, well-equipped venture to go into the desert and rediscover the reef and make everyone involved rich. And this is where the documented, undeniable part of the story begins, the part that no one disputes because it played out in the record. In 1930, the expedition set out into the central Australian desert to find Lasseter's gold, and the desert, as it always does, began to take its toll. They had come prepared, or so they thought, with vehicles, with supplies, even with an aircraft for scouting the terrain from above. This was meant to be a modern expedition, using the technology of its day to succeed where a lone traveler might fail, motor transport to cover the vast distances, an aeroplane to spot the reef from the air, and to guide the party across the featureless land. On paper, it was a well-conceived venture, far better resourced than anything Lasseter could have managed alone. But the Outback does not care how prepared you think you are. The reconnaissance aircraft crashed. The trucks broke down, defeated by the brutal terrain, the heat, the sand, the sheer punishing scale of the place. Machines that worked perfectly well in the settled world simply could not endure the conditions out there. The expedition ground to a halt, beaten back by the land itself. The days stretched on, the supplies dwindled, the terrain refused to yield, and the reef that was supposed to be findable did not appear. One by one, the practical realities became impossible, and the venture that had set out with such confidence fell apart. The other members, facing the hard facts, gave up. It was the sensible thing to do. It was almost certainly the thing that kept them alive. The desert had already shown them exactly what it was capable of, and they listened to the warning, but Lasseter would not give up. This is the detail that turns the story from an ordinary failed expedition into something that grips the imagination. When everyone else turned back, Lasseter pressed on, alone. With only 2 camels to carry him and his supplies, he continued into the desert to find the reef by himself, to prove at last that it was real. Whether this was courage, or obsession, or desperation, or some mixture of all three, no one can say. But picture it, one man, alone, with 2 camels, walking deeper into one of the most lethal landscapes on Earth, driven by the certainty or the need to believe that a fortune lay somewhere ahead in the sand. Everyone else had accepted that the desert had won. Lasseter could not, and the desert closed around him.
Run him he, nin kap. What happened to Harold Lasseter in the weeks that followed is known partly from what was later found, and partly from his own hand, because through it all, alone out there, he kept a diary, he wrote.
And the diary is the heart of this mystery, because of what it claims. According to the record he left, out there alone with his 2 camels, Lasseter found the reef again. He wrote that he had rediscovered it, the gold, the fortune, the thing he had staked everything on. After all the failure, all the abandonment, alone in the desert, he claimed he had stood before it once more. And then, in the cruelest possible turn, the desert took away his means of escape. His camels bolted. They ran, and they were gone, and with them went his transport, his supplies, his ability to carry himself and any proof of the reef back to the world. He was stranded, a man who had, by his own account, just found one of the greatest treasures on Earth, left with no way to reach it again, or to reach safety, alone in the killing heat with the gold he had died to prove somewhere just out of reach. And there, in the diary, is the detail that has driven treasure hunters mad for decades. Lasseter wrote that he had buried a map, a detailed record of the exact location of the reef, hidden in the ground to protect the secret, so that even if he died, the location would survive, waiting for someone who knew where to look. The precise position of the greatest lost gold deposit in Australian legend, committed to a map and buried in the desert by a dying man. Because he was dying, the diary's later entries tell the story of a man in his final extremity, starving, exhausted, ravaged by the heat and the isolation. There is a further thread in the traditional accounts, that in his last stretch of survival, Lasseter was for a time helped and sheltered by Aboriginal people of the desert, the people who, unlike him, truly knew that country and how to live in it, who had thrived in that same landscape for tens of thousands of years, where a European prospector could barely survive a few weeks. It is one of the quiet ironies of the whole tale. The man chasing a fortune through a wasteland was kept alive, for a while, by those to whom that wasteland was simply home. But even that could not save him in the end. His strength gave out, and the diary shows, painfully, a mind beginning to come apart. The heat and the desperation of his situation appear, in his own writing, to have driven him toward madness in those final days. The entries growing stranger, the grip on reality loosening, as the desert did to his mind what it was doing to his body. His body was eventually discovered by a search party, in a cave where he had taken shelter. He had died of starvation and exhaustion, alone, in the vast silence of the Outback. And beside him was the diary, with its extraordinary claims. The reef found again, the camels lost, the map buried, the fortune real. Or was it? This is where the mystery becomes genuinely unsolvable and genuinely haunting, because everything rests on the word of a man who was, by the evidence of his own final diary, losing his grip on reality as he wrote. Did Lasseter really find a colossal reef of gold twice? Or did the reef never exist at all, and the diary's triumphant claim of rediscovery was the delusion of a dying, heat-maddened mind, seeing at the end the thing he had needed so desperately to be true? Did he bury a real map to a real fortune? Or did he bury a map to nothing, a dying man's testament to a treasure that lived only in his own head? The only record of its rediscovery was written by a man alone, starving, half-mad with heat, with no one to confirm or deny a single word. If he saw gold in those final days, there was no one beside him to say whether it was truly there or a shimmer conjured by a failing mind. The desert is famous for its mirages, for the way heat and thirst and desperation can paint water and wonders onto empty sand. A man in his condition, staring at the ground he had staked his life on, might see gold whether it was there or not, and he wrote what he saw. He believed it, or his dying mind made him believe it, and he committed it to the page with the same conviction whether it was real or not. The diary cannot tell us which, because the diary only records what Lasseter perceived, and Lasseter, at the end, may no longer have been able to tell the difference himself. We cannot know, and that is precisely why the legend has never died, because both possibilities are unbearable in their own way. If the reef was real, then somewhere out there in the Australian desert lies one of the richest gold deposits on Earth, and a buried map that would lead straight to it, lost in the sand where a dying man hid it. And if the reef was never real, then Harold Lasseter chased a phantom into the desert, led others after it, and died alone for a fortune that never existed. A man destroyed by his own story, or his own lie, or his own dream. And people have chosen, overwhelmingly, to believe. In the years and decades after Lasseter's death, expedition after expedition went into the desert to find the reef and the buried map. Prospectors, adventurers, dreamers, and the desperate followed his ghost into the sand, poring over the diary, retracing his route, digging, searching, convinced that the gold was out there and that they would be the ones to find it. Some spent years of their lives on it. Some spent fortunes of their own chasing his fortune. The search for Lasseter's reef became a legend in itself, an obsession passed down like an inheritance, a fever that gripped generation after generation and never quite let go. Books were written, theories multiplied. Rival interpretations of the diary and the route argued over every clue. Some became convinced Lasseter had been telling the truth and that only bad luck had kept the gold from the world. Others became equally convinced that the whole thing had been a fabrication from the start, a con that spiraled out of its author's control until it killed him. The Reef became a mirror, and people saw in it what they needed to see: hope, or fortune, or folly, or fraud. And the story grew in the telling, as these stories do, embroidered and expanded, some details hardening into fact that may never have been true, others quietly forgotten. The legend took on a life independent of the man until Lasseter's Reef became less a specific geological claim and more a kind of national dream, the great lost treasure of the Australian outback, forever just over the next dune, forever almost within reach. But here is the fact that should give every believer pause, and that deepens the mystery rather than resolving it. Despite all of it, despite the hundreds of expeditions, despite decades of searching, despite the arrival of modern technology, of aircraft and advanced surveys, and eventually satellites able to scan the desert from orbit and map its surface in extraordinary detail, Lasseter's Reef has never been found. Not the gold, not the buried map, nothing. A reef of solid gold, many kilometers long, if it truly existed, exposed at the surface of the desert, should not be easy to hide forever. And yet the most sophisticated search tools humanity has ever possessed have swept that desert and turned up no trace of it. The gold Lasseter died to prove has never been seen again by anyone, if, indeed, it was ever seen at all. So what are we left with? A man, a story, a doomed expedition, a lonely death in a cave, and a diary full of claims that we can neither prove nor disprove. The skeptics have a strong case. The shifting dates, the geological implausibility of the reef as described, the doubts about Lasseter's original journey, the total failure of every subsequent search, and the plain evidence that the diary's final claims came from a mind unraveling in the heat. By this reading, Lasseter's Reef is a tragedy of the imagination, the story of a man who believed, or claimed to believe, in a fortune that was never there, and who paid for that belief with his life, taking the last of his certainty to a lonely grave in the sand. And yet, the believers have their answer too, and it is not so easily dismissed. The outback is almost unimaginably vast, and even now, even with satellites, it holds its secrets closely. People still vanish in it. Things are still lost in it, and never found. A single reef in that immensity could stay hidden for a very long time, even from those who look. And Lasseter, whatever else he was, went back. He did not simply spin a tale and stay home to enjoy the attention. He staked his life on it. He went into the desert to prove it, and when everyone else quit, he went on alone, and he died out there, rather than abandon the search. That is not the behavior we expect of a man who knew he was lying. It is the behavior of a man who believed, and belief that strong makes people wonder whether there was something to believe in. The desert keeps Harold Lasseter's secret now, as it kept him at the end. He died in a cave, alone, with the gold he had chased written into his final pages, and buried, he said, in a map beneath the sand. The searchers found his body. They never found his reef. And out there still, in the red and empty heart of Australia, the question lies exactly where he left it. Either a fortune waiting to be found, or nothing at all, and no way, after all this time, to tell which. Maybe the gold is real, and somewhere in that vast desert a seam of it still runs beneath the sun, and a dying man's map still lies buried in the ground, pointing the way for anyone who could ever find it. Or maybe there was never any gold, and there was only Harold Lasseter, and the terrible power of a story to lead a man to his death, chasing something that was never there. The desert is not telling. It swallowed the man, and the reef, and the map, and the truth, and it has held them all in its silence ever since, patient and empty and vast and giving nothing back. He walked out of the desert once, with a story that changed his life and ended it. He walked back into the desert to prove it, and the desert kept him. And the gold he swore was there, the fortune he died for, has never been seen from that day to this, waiting perhaps out in the sand, or never having been there at all. That is where Harold Lasseter's story ends, and where his mystery goes on, in a place too big and too empty to give up its secrets, holding the answer to a question no one has ever been able to close.